Wind had teeth atop the wall. It gnawed at wool and leather and the skin beneath until even memory felt bitten. John stood with the cold in his bones and ghost white against the snow at his side. The dire wolf still as carved frost when he was not moving and a blur of shadowed white when he was. The world was iron and ice to the north, a subtle blue where twilight nested, and pale gray to the south where the gift lay like a broad palm pressed against the wall. Smoke crawled up from Castle Black's chimneys, thin snakes whipped by the gale. Somewhere below he could hear men shouting, the clang of a bell, the dull thump of a mallet against timber. There was always hammering, always mending, always some small work that needed doing. The wall ate work and men both. Beside him Dolorous, Ed hunched in a patchwork of black and complained to the wind as if the wind might answer. "It's a good day," Ed said, voice flat with suspicion. "The sky hasn't fallen, and the soup wasn't moving. It'll all go bad at once to make up for it. It's a law." John let the words wash past. The cold stung his eyes and he blinked. He remembered summer fields far south, grasses shining. Remembered wolf pups tumbling in winter light at Winterfell in a courtyard that smelled of baked bread and old stone. Those things felt like stories told to him by another man. "You sent for me," Ed said after a moment. "Unless that raven got into the beer barrels and wrote the message himself." "I did," John said. The wind took his breath and he spoke again, louder. "I did. Does it concern the army we don't and won't have? Or the enemy nobody wants to think about? Or the Queen's men who would rather set fire to our kitchens than their own hearts?" Ed wrapped his cloak tighter. "Don't keep me in suspense. Suspense is warmer." John looked north and past north. Hardhome sat somewhere behind the curve of the world, full of frozen breath and dead fires and voices crying through the night. He had dreams of it, ice crackling and breaking, pale hands clawing on stone. He had never been there. Dreams were traveling he could afford. "What would you say to a lord?" John asked. It coughed. "To a lord I would say, 'You're lost, my lord, the feasts are south. Turn back or the wind will gnaw your ears off.' Not that kind of lord." John gripped the ice-slick crenellation. "A lord of the gift." Ed's breath went visible in a hard white plume. "The gift belongs to the watch," he said. "Or so we tell ourselves between bowls of thin stew. The last we had to do with lords, they were busy telling us precisely what we were allowed to remember. We're not supposed to hold lands." "We won't," John said. "He will." Ed stared at him, eyes squinting against the brightness. "Do you know any he's who'd say yes to such a mad idea and live long enough to regret it?" John did not answer. Ghost's red eyes glanced up to him. The wolf pressed his cold nose into John's hand as if to say, "You're thinking too hard again." "They'll say you're making kings," Ed murmured. "They'll say you're selling the black for a lord's high table." "I cannot feed men on rumor," John said. "We cannot hold 100 leagues of empty treeless wind. We brought them through the free folk. We set them in the gift because we need every hand, every seed, every stone set on stone. They follow Tormund. They listen to him. He laughs with them and eats with them, and when he strikes someone it is as if the blow cracked through the hole. They need a leader with a name the South will understand. Else when the first northern rider comes to the edge of the gift and sees smoke, he'll see a raid, not a hearth." Ed grimaced. "You want to make the wildling a lord. I want to give them a banner to gather under when the dead come." He thought of other banners, of white dire wolves and gray. Thought of the dire wolf in the snow with arrows in him, a dream that would not leave him. A title is a tool. If it breaks in your hand, you drop it. If it gives you leverage, you keep it. He will still answer to the watch. The land remains ours. The fields feed the wall, not a lord's pride. And Bowen Marsh will follow his trousers into the latrine and hide in it. Ed rubbed his nose with the back of one glove. "If you do it swiftly. If you do not, don't do it a little at a time. Men can forgive a swift cut. A slow one only encourages us to show you how to stop." Snow like ash began to fall. Ghost licked it from John's glove. Below, the bell rang again. John looked down the jagged mile of ice steps and imagined, absurdly, throwing himself down them to avoid the 100 other small knives waiting in hallways and words. "Send for him," Jon said. "Would you?" "If I must," Ed said. "And I must, because you're stubborn." He went toward the ice stairs as if descending to be swallowed by the throat of some immense sleeping thing, muttering to himself, "Let's fetch the giant and the man who says he drinks giants under the table. Maybe if they knock a few walls down, we'll have fewer to mend." Jon stood a little longer. He thought of the vow that was a chain and also a light in his hands. He had spoken the words when his voice was raw from cold and youth, and had never ceased to feel them in his mouth. Men had grown to hate him for those words and for the way he insisted they meant what they said. He had learned that the letter of law could be a cudgel, and its spirit a sword. The snow thickened. Ghost shook himself and made shadow snow fly. "Come," Jon said to no one, to the idea, to the tiny warming knot of decision. He left the wall to the wind and descended. Tormund Giant's Bane arrived as the snow arrived, in a gust and a laugh and the smell of meat and wet furs. The man filled doorways, not just with size but with the way his voice seemed to need roofs above it that did not exist. He bellowed a greeting like a trumpet and let his beard shake and thump with it. "You sent for me, Crow," he said as if Jon had thrown a summons like a spear that had lodged in Tormund's ribs and dragged him here. A half-dozen free folk followed, some with bone ornaments and some with iron, some with the bare red hands of people who had been gutting something just before. "If you have the Southern King's roast laid out, I'll forgive you for making me climb your ice ladder." "There is soup," Ed said, dour as a prayer stone. "It's not moving. That is good news." "There was less soup before," Satin murmured, hovering behind Jon with a tablet and quill. "I told the kitchens to let the beans soak longer." Tormund drew off his gloves with his teeth. "Look at you," he said to Jon. "Always up and down the stones like a man who's thinking of jumping but wants to choose the prettiest spot." He put the gloves under his belt and spread his hands. They were large, scarred, the color of old oak bark. "What is it you're ready to shout at the wind?" Jon gestured to the bench. They stood instead. Tormund would have broken the bench, likely with that winter weight. Ghost moved between their knees and nudged Tormund, who scratched between Ghost's ears with surprising gentleness. "I want to give you a thing you never asked for," Jon said. Tormund's eyes crinkled. He was older than he looked when he bellowed, and younger when he smiled. "Nothing I've never had done to me before." "A name," Jon said. "A title." "You want to marry me," Tormund said solemnly. Satin made a choking noise and bit his lip. Ed, who had taken a spoon of soup, coughed, swallowed, and said, "That would solve a number of problems and create tidier ones." Jon kept his face still. "Lord of the Gift," he said, "to speak for the free folk in the lands south of the wall, to hold them to peace with our neighbors, to see they pay their share and reap their share, to raise men if enemies threaten, and to offer up grain if our stores are thin. You would answer to the watch. You would bear no right to pass the land to your heirs because it is not yours. But you would sit with me in council and attend judgment when claims and quarrels come to us. You would be the face of this new order when riders from the south come looking to hate and forget. They will expect a lord, and you will be that. Call it a lie if you like. I call it a tool." Tormund's laugh was a bark cut short. He put a hand to his beard, tugged, let crooked teeth show. "A lord." He tried the word as if it were a strange stew. "I've killed lords, Crow. They don't know what to do with me, and I don't know what to do with them, unless it's drink them or set them alight. Why would I put on a name that makes my tongue itch? Because your people need a shield that speaks a language their enemies understand," Jon said. "Because the watch cannot be everywhere at once. And because 1,000 small thefts and a few hot heads will breed sour rumor enough to poison 100 leagues in a season. Because when the dead come, I need you with a horn in your hand and men ready to run where you tell them and not stop to ask what a crow wants." Tormund looked past Jon to the hearth. The fire was small, grudging. "You want me to be the stone that stops the river from going where it will." "I want you to be the river," Jon said quietly, "that knows where to flood and when to carve. Be a lord as you understand it. Be you. But give me a voice that can call in the fields, too." Tormund grunted. He turned his head and spat into the fire. "It'll sizzle," he said, watching it. "Listen at it. My spit talks more sense than most lords I've known. What do I get? Besides a name that feels like a hawk thick with lice. A hall at Queen's Crown while your folk raise their steadings. That broken little tower with a lake around like a belt?" Tormund shook his head. "It's a good place if you don't love company." "You said once you liked a good fight," Jon said. "There will be raiders. They will try to take fish from the lake and grain from the barns, and they will think the free folk will not stand together. Make them learn otherwise." "I'm a good teacher," Tormund admitted. "What else?" "Wards," Jon said. "We share the burden. Your son or grandson or a boy of your line to foster at the wall. I take him into my household, teach him letters and law, hear him grumble. In turn, I ask one of my young brothers to live in your hall. He will watch and learn and tell me what I need to hear and not what I want. In times of peace, he will eat your food. In times of war, he will bleed in your courtyard and take the bleeding as an honor." Tormund's eyes narrowed. "You think I mean to turn on you the first time your back's to the fire?" "I think men are men," Jon said. "I trust you. I do not trust hunger, or rumor, or the cold." Tormund threw back his head and laughed, a sound like a bear's plaid roar. "There it is. You speak as if every word is a knife that must be turned a certain way or else it will cut your own fingers. You are young to speak so." He took a half step toward Jon, close enough that Jon could smell the leather and smoke baked into his beard. "I have sons," he said. "I have daughters. Fewer than I had once. The ice took some. The crows took some. The time it takes to drink a cup took some. I give you a boy, you teach him your stern crow ways, you give me one of your soft boys and we make him harder. I can do this. I can sit in a broken tower and bellow my words across a lake. I can make the slow and the stupid listen because I am slow and stupid when I want to be, and fast when it matters. But I have a price. I always have a price. Name it. You stop sending good men to die on ships at Eastwatch if the sea is going to spit their bodies back at us frozen." The laughter went out of his face. "You call back what you can call back from Hardhome. You tell the ones we cannot save that we will put bread in the mouths of the children who come without them, and you mean it, and you stop listening when the row-ing woman tells you what a fire is saying." Ghost's ears pricked. Ed looked at the hearth, as if expecting the logs to answer. Jon held Tormund's gaze and then, carefully, nodded. "I have to try for Hardhome," he said. "I have men there. I can't unmake that. But I will not spend lives like coin. I won't listen to—" He stopped. Melisandre's eyes were winter cold and summer hot together. He had watched her watch the flames as if the flames were a book she was writing. "I will not listen only to her." Tormund showed his teeth again. "That's almost what I asked. I'll take it." He stuck out his hand. Jon took it. The fingers closed like a trap. The bargain felt like a frostbitten limb being pressed against hot stone. Painful and necessary. Satin wrote on his tablet with small neat scratches. Ed said, "The soup is getting cold. That would be a tragedy if it were warmer than the air." "Come to the yard at dusk," Jon told Tormund. "Bring those who follow you. Bring those who don't. We'll make the saying of it public, so I cannot pretend later I didn't do what I did." "We can always pretend," Tormund grinned, "but we'll make a show of it. I love a show." He clapped Jon on the shoulder hard enough that Jon's teeth clicked and left. His laughter seemed to hang in the doorway like a banner after he went. Ed watched him go. "If he's a lord," he said, "I'm a maester. I'll grow links out of potatoes and string." "Don't grow them too fast," Satin said, unruffled. "The potatoes have to feed someone." At dusk the yard was a splayed hand of snow and old mud. Soot rimmed the white where boots tramped. Starlight came early in the north and the torches smoldered as if reluctant to admit their own light. The free folk came like a wave pushed by laughter, their furs salted with snow, their hair braided with bone and copper. The Queen's men lined one side under their searing banners, their cloaks rich even after a season's hardening. Celis herself was not present. She disdained such barbarous business, but her knights were, and the look on their faces was like the point of a spear hidden under velvet. The Black brothers clustered opposite them, a ragged edge of iron discipline undercut by suspicion. Bowen Marsh's mouth was a set turnip, as if he had decided never to smile again and kept forgetting and remembering why. Melisandre stood near the gate, a living flame in red, her skin a pale invitation to a fire you didn't know you had. Her eyes found Jon, and he felt the tickle of being seen to his bones. Val stood not far from her, white fur thrown back from the fine lines of her face, hair a pale river under the torchlight. One Weg one crouched near the keep's door, one huge knee up by his chin, his eyes reflecting the torches in two miserable stars. The giant's presence made everything else look like a child's toy. Jon mounted the steps to the top of the yard. Ghost leapt easily and stood at his right with his tail still and his head high. Jon's breath came and went white as a vow. "Men of the Watch," he called. "Free folk, you who were enemies and are now uneasy neighbors. I am Jon, called Snow, and I serve as Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. Hear me." Crows cawed from the rookery. The winter world listened. "The lands south of the wall were given to the Watch long ago for the guarding of the realm," Jon said. "They have emptied, as winters came and men chose warmer walls. You have come through the gates with my leave to settle them. You will plant, you will harvest, you will mend the fences and clear the wells. You will not raid south. You will not take a sheep without paying in fleece or fence posts. You will not steal a girl. You will not break the guest's bread and then break his face. In turn, the Watch will uphold your right to dwell there. We will ask labor, grain, and service. We will not take your sons for our vows unless your sons freely come. That is the law I have set." A murmur. Not quite assent and not quite rebellion. Tormund stood with his hands on his hips and listened with his head cocked like a great gull regarding a crab. "Laws are empty unless a man stands in the door to speak them when there is trouble," Jon continued. "So I name Tormund, called Giant's Bane, in all his unrepeatable names and boasts, Lord of the Gift." He let the words fall and the shock they made spread. "He will sit at Queen's Crown until his folk raise him a hall. He will speak for the free folk in the Gift and hold them to peace. He will stand with the Watch when the dead come down from the true north. He will answer to me and to the oaths we keep. He will take a ward into his household from the Watch, and give me a son of his line to foster in mine. That is my naming. If it's folly, it will be my folly, and the burden of it will sit on my shoulders, not yours." A laugh broke like kindling catching. Tormund had his arms spread. "Lords and ladies," he boomed, and half the yard winced as if the air itself had been slapped. "I'm your lord. My arse says so. There was a time I would have told any man who spoke that word about me to go lick the icicles off a dead horse. But your crow-in-chief tells me a lord is a sort of great shout that keeps the wolves away. I like wolves, but I like my grandchildren more. So hear me. You take a sheep that's not one of yours, I'll take your ear. You take a girl who didn't take you first, I'll have your hand. You drink like a child and fight like a dog, I'll have you digging ditches around Queen's Crown until your arms remember they belong to a person. You go south without leave and the kneelers catch you. Don't cry to me. If they come here and make trouble, I'll show them what it means to be colder than they thought they could be. That's my saying. Now get me a horn of whatever passes for drink at this pile of rock, so I can begin to lie about how well I'll do." Laughter burst out. Not all of it was friendly, but it was loud, and loudness sometimes did the work of warmth. In a winter yard, a horn moved to Tormund from somewhere like a bird bringing him fruit. He drank deep, wiped his beard with his sleeve, and smacked his lips. A queen's man stepped forward, Ser Patrek of King's Mountain, by his silvered helm and the foolishness painted on his cloak. A leaping stag so bright he looked like a child's tail walking. "You don't have the authority," he said to Jon, voice bright and young. He looked like a man who had read laws but had never held one when it bled. "You cannot give titles. You cannot make lords. I can name offices of the Watch and who fills them," Jon said. "Lord of the Gift is such an office, newly made. The word lord soothes southern ears. If it pricks yours, call him Castellan. Call him Keeper of the Gift. Call him whatever you like when you whisper into your pillow.
Se patrax mote tiktanat.
It's treason to the Queen's king. Your king is far, Ed said in his bleached voice. Our wall is near. Her grace will hear of this, Patrek spat. Her grace hears much, Melisandre said, turning her head a very little. The watchlight found rubies at her throat and made them live. And the flames hear more. Do not place yourself where they can hear your name, sire, if you do not like what follows. Tormund belched, considered the night, and laughed. You look like a man who thinks he can kill a giant all over again by telling the world he did it once, he said. Have a care around my friend there. He bites. One grumbled like frost grinding in a gorge and lifted his head an inch. Ser Patrek took one backward step he no doubt thought subtle. Jon let the moment sit. He knew how quickly small quarrels could flame and how easily flames ran along rope. Any brother who would object, he said finally to the black cloaks. Speak now. I will hear you. Bowen Marsh spoke without taking a step. He sounded as if he addressed a ledger. The oaths forbid lands and titles, he said. We are not lords. We cannot treat the land as our domain, nor make a petty court of our own. I am not making a lord in the sense you fear, Jon said. Tormund will have no right to the land. He will have duties. He will answer to the watch like any man. This is a shape to hang work on, nothing else. You make shapes that look like swords, Marsh said. Do not be surprised when those you shelter beneath them wake cut. Jon could have argued, turned the words and polished them and thrown them back like stones. He did not. You've been heard, he said instead. We go forward. He took from under his cloak a band of iron that Othel Yarwick's men had hammered from a gate hinge. Practical, unlovely, a piece of something that had shut and would now open, to fit Tormund's forearm like the ring of a tree. Jon slid it up past wool and fur. Tormund didn't bow. He thrust his arm out and bared his teeth as if daring anyone to unmake the ring with a look. You are the lord of the gift, Jon said. I will expect you at council every 3 days. You will get me when I am not freezing, Tormund said cheerfully. Which will be never. They drank some sour wine and water disguised as wine to say the form, and the crowd thinned, and the wind strengthened, and the sky hardened into an arrow of night. Melisandre did not come to Jon with a riddle. That was mercy or strategy. Val came, though. He'll make a mess, she said, looking in the direction Tormund had gone as if the earth itself were an ocean across which he was sailing, his wake a churn of broken ice. But it will be a mess that smells of soup. That is better than the mess that smells of blood. He'll make both, Jon said. So will you. Val tilted her head, studying him. You are colder than you think you are, but your cold is chosen. His is born on him. It's a difference. She put one hand to his arm briefly. It was as if a bucket of warm water had been poured into his sleeve. I would ask a boon from your new lord, if this is the game we are playing. Name it, Jon said warily. Do not call me princess in his hall. Val smiled, sharp as fox teeth. I am not that, and I do not need men with swords thinking I am something they are allowed to steal. Then I won't, Jon said. He watched her go and thought of the letter he had not yet received and almost felt the shape of it in the air. Flayed man's words, written on pink and blood, with teeth in them. The next days were made of moving parts. Tormund took Queen's Crown with 20 men and 5 women and 1 boy not yet old enough to keep a blade steady but old enough to carry wood with pride. The tower was in worse shape than Jon remembered. Ice had eaten brick like a hungry animal. Half the outer stairs had crumbled to a suggestion of hazard. The lake around it was frozen near to shore in a ring like a broken necklace. The causeway still made an arm from land to island, slick and narrow, with the water lapping under its edges like something alive that was patient. Jon went there with Yarwick to survey what needed doing and with Melisandre because she came, because she did not ask to come. Ghost ran ahead, slipping and not slipping with wolf deceit. The free folk cried for warmth and set to work to make it. They shuttered holes with planks from the half-ruined sheds south of the tower. They cut reeds at the lake's edge and stuffed them in cracks and laughed at each other when the reeds crunched. Tormund stood with his hands on his belt and told 3 different groups 3 different lies about how fine the place would be when he was done smashing it into a shape he liked. "It's a good seat," he said to Jon. His breath billowed. "Easier to defend than a stew pot and nearer to fish than the other places you might have foisted me. We'll put a hall here, not a lord's hall. A big room where the air knows it is supposed to be warm. You'll need boats when the spring thaws," Yarwick said. "If the ice breaks hard, you'll find yourself singing out there at the Ux with no way to come to land." Tormund clapped him on the shoulder. "A practical crow. I like a practical crow. I will not throw you in the water and see if you float. Yet." Jon walked the causeway and thought about what men looked like on it when they ran. He imagined raiders, northern or otherwise, trotting out with torches to scare free folk and run back with a sack of smoked fish, and he imagined where to put men with bows to make the running very fast and then very sudden. He told Tormund, and Tormund nodded and took the thought like a rabbit and skinned it and wore it. Mole's Town had its own chunk of work. The burrowers didn't like the free folk, and the free folk didn't like the burrowers, seeing in them a kind of knuckling that smelled of sour beer and half-dead light. Tormund went there with 2 of his men and 1 thick-shouldered spearwife called Bruni and a sack of salt that took 3 of them to carry, and he sat in the biggest tunnel and broke bread with the old women and shared salt and told them if any man with a bone necklace laid a hand on a Molestown girl, he would come down into the tunnels with a branch full of thorns and not leave until everyone knew why bread tasted better when you knew what else you might have had to eat. Jon held court at Castle Black every 3rd evening, and Tormund came every other 3rd. When he came, men came with him with quarrels in their eyes like seeds that wanted planting. A man with cheeks like the red flesh of a winter apple claimed his neighbor had stolen 3 hens. Tormund asked him how he knew they were 3 and not 4, and the man said he had counted them every morning, and Tormund asked why the neighbor hadn't stolen them at night when hens were easier to grab, and the man said because there was a dog, and Tormund said the dog was dull, and the whole thing became so foolish that both men despised their own complaints. In time, they agreed to share the right to gather the neighbor's chicken droppings to use for their potatoes. A spearwife came with hair like moss and eyes like river stones and told Jon a man had struck her child. The man said the child had been stealing tubers, and the spearwife said that if he had told her, she would have given him tubers, and the child had only wanted to feel the heat in his belly for an hour. Jon began to speak of fines. Tormund cut him off. "You," he told the man, "get hungry with that boy every 3rd night until the snows melt. Sit with him on that night and look at him while your belly talks to you. That is your fine. You," to the spearwife, "send me the boy. I will put him to carry water and split sticks. If he takes without asking again, I will put him to stand every hour he is not working in the cold until his teeth learn not to thirst." The man of the Queen's men found a reason to sneer at every judgment. Jon learned to let the sneer hang unchallenged. Better a sneer than a sword. A sneer was a bridge that might be crossed later if there were time. Ghost caught and ate 3 rats in the kitchens and was loved there like a minor saint. He slept in Jon's chamber whenever he could be coaxed from his own wandering, but sometimes Jon woke to a white shadow by the window that was not his and felt watched in a way he could not name. The wind made the glassed-in window rattle, and the stars looked close enough to bite. Bowen Marsh came to Jon one morning with a paper full of numbers that read as if a man had been carving tally marks into his own nails. "We have grain for 4 months at current ration," he said, "and for 6 if we pretend men can live on hope. We will not have enough when the deep cold comes, not unless the gift gives us its whole heart." "The gift will give us what it can," Jon said. "You pin too much on that wildling." Marsh's face was a winter squash. "You take counsel from a fire worshipper. You mock the very law that keeps us from becoming a pack of dogs." "I don't take counsel from a fire," Jon said. Marsh looked even more disapproving at humor than he did at everything else, and so Jon saved humor for when he needed to feel it in his mouth like a coin. "I take counsel from hunger and from the knives that enemy puts in men's hands." He leaned forward. "I did not bring them through lightly. If I could have closed the gate and forgotten the shadows moving beyond it, I would have slept better for a week. And then I would never have slept again. You have sons, Marsh." "I have nothing but my vows," Marsh said stiffly. "Then you have sons, in that every man who wears black is your worry," Jon said. Help me. We cannot be what we were. We have to be what the world demands. The world demands we die, Marsh said and left. John went to the yard to find Melisandre with a small iron brazier burning so hot the air above it quivered. Her red hair looked alive with heat. "Your friend the giant shivers less," she said without looking at him. "He has a greater mass," John said. She smiled with half her mouth. "You make a jest. That is good. The dead do not. If you must jest with anything, jest with your fear. It knows jokes." "I have no time for fear," John said. "Make it," Melisandre said and looked into her fire. "Stones crack when men forget to listen to what they are. Are you stone, Jon Snow? Or are you the river that eats stone and pretends to think while it drinks?" "What do you see?" he asked, aggravated against his better judgment. It took no effort to not believe and every effort to not want to believe. There was a difference. "I see a man crowned in snow and not pleased by it," Melisandre said. "I see a horn that does not blow and a horn that does. I see a tower on an island and the water around it black with movement. I see a woman with pale hair combing blood out of it with a comb made of bone. I see letters like knives. They come from south." "Good," John said bitterly. "I'll open them with my throat." A raven arrived 2 days later from Eastwatch. Its F. Aethers rhymed as if the very air had thrown a net over it on its way. Cotter Pike's hand made its mess of ink. "Hard home," it said in the broken grammar of a man stabbed by everything but a blade, was a nest of bad dreams made real. He could not land for the ice. They had hauled some off the shore with ropes, children with hands like dead fish. The wind carried screams. The masts cracked. He would try again if the sea did not eat his lungs. A lesser note, in a different hand, politely informed John that at least one of the ships was out of action because it had struck a floe and lost half its innards. John read it twice. He did not take it to Melisandre. He took it to Tormund, who spat and said, "The sea is a thing you respect like a mother who does not love you. I'll send my fastest runners along the shore. They can scream warnings at the waves. It won't do much, but it will tell me who among mine can still listen to orders when their own ghosts are speaking." He did that, and he took 8 men and 3 women and a boy with a horn that had been his father's and went northeast along the old shore road to villages that were now only names in mice bites on old maps. John went with him as far as the line of sight to Eastwatch's distant towers. Bone spikes against a pewter sky, and then he turned back. The wall had too many doors, and each one asked a different question of him. He had barely put aside his gloves in his solar when Satin came with eyes wide and voice low. "A rider from the south," he said. "Alone. He says he bears a letter that should not be read." "Letters like that aren't letters," Ed observed as John stood. "They're knives. A man who brings one is a knife with legs." The rider was a thin man with teeth too white for a northerner, as if he had polished them with snow. He had no cloak, though he needed one. His hands shook in their mittens. In his inner scrip, under a layer of oiled leather, he carried a square of pink parchment with wax the color of heart's blood. The arms stamped in it were a flayed man upside down. John broke it with his nail. The words were a kind of laughter written down and sharpened. "The castle at Winterfell had a new master," the letter said. "The false king from the south had been ground into the snow like a bad dream. The lord at the wall should send back Ramsay's bride and his wife's old friend and the king's red whore and the queen's knight if he wanted to keep his head upon his shoulders. He should remind the free folk who killed their chiefs what a true northern winter could do when led by a man who knew where to put a knife. If the watch wanted proof, it would soon find it. The rider would come and flay the Lord Commander and hang his skin from the wall to flap like a prayer flag." He signed himself with his father's name and his own, and with a title he had seized with hands that smelled of copper. John read it once and then a second time because the second reading felt like swallowing stones and maybe the third would feel like eating bread. It did not. It hurt his chest in a clean way. He understood suddenly that he might change the world around him and still find himself bought dearly by a single letter. Ed read the letter and snorted as if the very paper stank. If you didn't hate him for the rest, you'd hate him for his handwriting. Satin's cheeks had gone clay white. "What will you do?" he asked. "Read it to the men," Jon said. "Give me a horn." He was already reaching in his mind for that other horn he did not own, the one that lived in tales and in the pocket where lies warmed themselves like stones. He called the brothers to the yard, and the free folk who were near enough to hear a shout, and the queen's men who would not come and those who would come to mock. He read the letter while he felt his own heart beat between lines like something trapped. When he finished, there was a silence like a place under the ice. "I will not send anyone," Jon said. "The girl we have is not the girl he says. The man he names is dead to me and safe from him. The Red Woman is no man's to send. If he comes north, we will meet him with walls and bows and a sea he cannot walk." "Your oath," Bowen Marsh said. He always chose the moments that were most like a cut with ice when he could. "You cannot lead the men of the Watch south. We are not your bannermen. We do not answer flayed men with southern war." "I will not lead the Watch south," Jon said, each word itself a stone put in place. "I will ride with free folk who will follow me, because they are not my men under oath, and I am not breaking my vow if I go to keep the peace on the edge of our lands. If you cannot see that the wall is not a wall for separating pride, then I cannot make you see it with anything but blood." "Then do not go," Marsh said, face tight as a wound that had scabbed badly. "Look to the north and not to childish brawls." Tormund's voice rose from the back of the crowd. "That pup with pink letters won't come," he said. "He's a boy whose father forgot to teach him the winter's true songs. He will nibble at us. He will gnaw at your friends. He will take ears and fingers and write them into letters. He wants you to run. He wants to hold up your vow like a window to laugh through. Don't oblige him." "What then?" Jon asked. He could feel eyes on him like the weight of snow on a branch that had been carrying too much already. "Let me go," Tormund said. "It is my title you gave me. Let me use it. I will bring my own and will stand in the fields and on the paths and will make it so that the North's little bastard son will be too busy counting his thumbs to come to your gate." He jutted his jaw. "And if he does, we'll sing to him on the causeway." He meant the causeway at Queen's Crown. Jon tasted the word causeway as if it were wine. He saw, in his mind's eye, a thin line of men on that narrow strip, shields up, arrows black against bright. He saw pale shapes in the water and he did not ken. Ow, if they were fish or men under ice or his own fear. He saw a giant wading with the water at his waist. He saw Melisandre's lips moving not to a god but to herself. "Very well," Jon said. "You will go, and I will go with you." Bowen Marsh's face broke in shock. "You just said." "I will go as a man," Jon said. "Not as Lord Commander. I will loose no black arrows south. I will borrow none of the Watch's horses. I will take Ghost and my sword. That is what I can do within my vow. If I die, you will have the luxury of being able to say it was folly and the heavier burden of discovering whether you can do better." "Folly," Ed said, polite as a winter barb. "A fine word for walking out into a field with your name on your head. But since when have we not done folly? If you go and I tell you not to go, I will still have to watch the point of your boot disappear." Ser Patrek had been watching with bright contempt. He leaned to whisper to a fellow Queen's man, and in the whispering there was fear, and in the fear there was the decision to cover it. As the crowd broke, he pushed his way toward Val. His hand went out quick. He grabbed at her sleeve some inches from skin, a gesture as light as a question. One stood up from his crouch faster than a house could fall. The giant's hand came down on the knight and closed and picked him up as if he were a bundle of sticks. Ser Patrek yelled, high and wrong in the throat, kicked. Steel flashed someone's. One squeezed. Bones made the sound bones make when they are obeying someone else. "Stop," Jon said, but he said it into the kind of silence that had iron in it and no words could cross. One flung the broken knight against the wall. The body left a comet of blood behind it. The Queen's men drew swords as if the air had commanded them. The free folk screamed and laughed and screamed again. Melisandre lifted a hand and said one word in a language Jon's blood wanted to understand, and the blade closest to her went from glowing to dripping, and the man who held it screamed like a kettle. Ghost pressed at Jon's legs, pushing him toward the giant, toward the center. 1-1, Tormund roared. Hush your hands. The giant looked down, eyes rolling. He made a sound like rocks rubbing and let them hang by his sides, huge and very careful hands useless as prayer. Val stood still in the chaos like a coral in mid-flight. She had drawn a knife and not used it. Her face was white. Her eyes were wide and blue in a way that made Jon think of cracks in a great sheet of ice that showed the black water under. Get her inside, he ordered. Now. After, there were meetings like storms. The Queen's men wanted blood for blood and a giant head for a small one. Jon gave them words and they wanted more words, and he had none. He went to 1-1 with Tormund and stood on a table to meet the giant's eyes as if he were a child at a tall man's knee. 1-1 made grief noises. They are not like men's grief noises, Jon learned. They are deeper and they come from places in the chest that men have forgotten the directions to. He thought she was a thing, Tormund said. He reached like a boy reaching for a coin in a stream. 1-1 is a knife. He doesn't know he has an edge until he cuts. I will keep him out of their eyes for a time. We are one breath from a war inside walls, Jon said. No, Tormund said. We are always that breath. It's just that now you and I can see the cloud we will make when we finally let it out. They rode 2 days later. The air was white and then gray and then white again, and the snow came in gentlemanly flakes that made the world look clean and lied about what lay under. Jon wore black and a plain cloak and a hood that came low. Tormund wore a dead thing that had been a bear and looked like it missed the world only a little. They took 20 free folk. Men with scars that told their stories and women who walked as if everyone in the world had underestimated them and they had forgiven no one. The boy with the horn came too. His name was Hake, and he had eyes so green they looked like moss on a rock in wet weather, and he had never been south of the wall before. They went first to Long Barrow, where barrows swelled under snow like doddering grandfathers. There were candles flickering in clay cups on one of the mounds, someone's quiet prayer to old kings who were dirt now. A northern rider had poked around here, or several. Tormund found tracks and spat on them and cursed them for not being clearer. They waited in a ruined byre for a night and were greeted by the sort of quiet that has questions in it. A fox crept near, bold as a rumor, and Hake tried to feed it dried fish, and it took the fish and bit him for his thanks. He cried and then laughed and then cried again, and Jon remembered other boys with other hopes. From Long Barrow they went toward the last river, which was not the last of anything except patience. The ice there was thick and black beneath its snow, and the sound of water moving under stone came up in grumbles where holes had been cut for fishing. They found a small band of men on the ice with spears that had been smoothed too much by too many hands. They said nothing, lifted their chins, and said that the free folk had taken 3 of their sheep, and they had come to take 1 man to pay for it by standing on the ice blindfolded until it decided whether it liked him or not. Jon said no, and the men looked at Tormund and said, "And you?" Tormund reached into a pack and took out salt and cut it with a knife and held it to them, and when they refused he smeared it on one of their mouths by force. The man sputtered. Tormund made him swallow the rest, and then he looked at the others and said, "We have broken bread in the only way that matters on this river. If you want to try me again when the sun is higher, we will see whose fingers freeze first while we shout at each other." They laughed. They had to. He was too big fo. Are them to refuse his joke. They went away with scowls that were 9/10 performance and 1/10 habit. The habit would take more work. At Queen's Crown they found the causeway slick and a half-dozen figures standing on it like crows on a thin fence. Tormund put his hand to his mouth and bellowed, and the figures let their shoulders drop and made themselves known. One had an arrow shaft tied behind his knee with a strip of hide where a wound hid. Tormund cuffed him and told him you could not guard a road if you could not stand on it, and told him to sit at the end instead and shout if he saw something that walked like a man and moved like a lie. In the hall that was not yet a hall, they sat around a fire that was a muttering beast. Jon watched faces by it and wondered not for the first time how many of these people would die, because this was what the world had given their breath to do. He slept on old wool as scratchy as truth and woke twice thinking he had heard a horn. The second time there was one, and Hake was blowing like his lungs were full of the wind's anger and not his own. Men came out of the visible dark in shapes that promised more shape behind them. They were not a noble's troop. They were men on tough little horses with bits of colors tied to their arms and a certain bold slouch that came of not being ordered in a long time. There were perhaps 30. They rode to the beginning of the causeway and sat and looked at the tower and then at the water and then at the tower again. Their leader had a fox's tail on his helm. It bounced when he nodded and made him look ridiculous and dangerous at once. Tormund leaned an elbow on a sill and shouted, "Does your mother know you're out?" The man with the fox tail grinned. "My mother's too busy eating to ask questions," he called back. "We came for fish. We heard the free folk don't know what to do with nets." "Bring your nets," Tormund replied. "We'll show you how to keep your fingers from freezing to them." "You'll show that with your tongues then," the man said. His men laughed obediently. He sat his horse with a lazy poise, and then his gaze went beyond Tormund to Jon as if drawn by a thought. "And who is that?" he asked. "He looks like a man who reads letters. I don't trust men who read letters." "He's my wife," Tormund said without missing a beat. "I married him for his pretty jaw." The men laughed again. It was a relief to laugh that tasted bitter. Jon touched the pommel of his sword and made himself not think about it while the men on the causeway edged their horses forward and then backward again as the wind made the ice sing. It was not that day that the first blood came. It was later, after 3 more days of talking and a day of nothing but watching snow pretend to be everything, that a man crept up at night with shoes wrapped in fur and a knife in his teeth and tried to cut Hake's throat while he slept. Hake woke with a sound like a fox caught in a snare. Jon was there before he knew he had moved, the sword in his hand and Ghost a white avalanche at the door. The man had Hake by the hair and the knife in an awkward hand that had not done this before or had done it too often and learned nothing from the doing. Tormund hit him with a stick big enough to be a small tree. The crack was ugly. The man fell, shaking. He cried like a child. He was no older than Hake. "I was told to fetch a boy," he wept when he could speak. "They said the free folk had stole a winter child from a farm, and if I brought back one of yours to the White Knife there would be coin. I wanted coin. My wife hates me and my father thinks I am a wife. I wanted." Tormund listened without expression. "You're lucky," he said finally. "You chose a boy with lungs. We would take your knife hand and call it done. Or your ear if we were feeling soft. Today I am feeling soft because I want to make you into a mouth that can run south and say my name the right way." He pointed with the stick. Tell them the Lord of the Gift says he will roast any man he catches on the causeway. Tell them we have no children here who are not ours and none we took from farms. Tell them to come and ask us if they think otherwise. Bring me an old woman who knows the names of all the small bones in a hand, and I will sit her in our hall, and we will count together." The man nodded, tears freezing on his face. He went away like someone's bad dream. Hake sat by the fire with his knees up and his horn untouched. Jon thought of all the things he wanted to say to him and said none of them because if he were Hake they would sound like a man who did not know where a horn lived when it was not at his lips. Celis sent a raven that week, a letter written with a hand like a frozen feather. She said that the savage had murdered one of her true knights and must be put to death or else she would take matters into her own hands as soon as she could find them. Jon wrote back that the savage had murdered the knight when the knight manhandled a highborn guest under his protection, and that the savage had exactly as much of a life to lose as the Queen's men's pride. He did not send that letter. He sent one that was cooler and made the same point with fewer bodily metaphors. It did not soothe. Celis sent another letter that demanded one be put in chains or else driven north with fire. Jon folded it and tucked it under a bowl in his chamber because sometimes that was the best way to deal with the world. Melisandre came to Queen's Crown once in that time, with 2 of the Queen's men and a short fellow who claimed to be a smith and looked like a man who had hammered nails out of such small bits of iron it made him believe in gods. She stood by the lake and watched the water under the ice with an expression Jon could not read. "It is not merely the north that threatens," she said lightly, as if they were speaking of stew. "The south will burn because it refuses to be warmed. Understand that when you choose where to place your feet." "My feet have never known a day when they were not cold," Jon said. "Even so," she murmured, "your friend will die if he keeps standing where he is." "Which friend?" Jon asked, and she smiled a winter thing. "Don't be tedious," she said. and went away with her red skirts, making the white look more honest for a while. The first dead thing they killed in the gift was not a man. It was a dog, except it wasn't. It came at dusk, moving in a way that made everyone's eyes unsure. It had no breath, no steam at its mouth. Its eyes were blue, not like sky, but like something that has decided to be blue and refuses all argument. It pushed its face between two slats and bit at the air where Hake's calf had been, and then turned on Ghost when Ghost came at it. And Ghost danced back because he knew this dance and did not love it. John had a knife blade of dragonglass tied under his shirt. He pulled it and threw it and missed. He cursed himself for missing. He took the boy's horn from the boy's feeble hands and clubbed the thing with it, stupid and desperate. It made a sound like teeth clacking. Tormund came with a spear with an obsidian tip and drove it down, and the dog fell into itself like a rotting fruit collapsing, except there was no smell. Simply unmade. Tormund panted. "Next time," he said, "they'll send something else to ask the same question." "What question?" Hake asked, voice high. "Where are you, soft?" Tormund said, not unkindly, and he clapped the boy's shoulder. Other such things came in ones and twos, and sometimes a farmer came thin and hunched with a story about a thing that knocked on his door, as if it were a neighbor wanting to borrow salt, and his wife had gone to open it, and he had dragged her back by the hair and put his shoulder to the door, and he had heard a little child's voice outside saying the name of his dead baby, and he had made a noise in his throat like a chopped tree and kept the door shut with his body until dawn, when the voice had blown away like blown snow. John drew maps no one else could see, in his head, of where the fear was thickest. It matched the fear his ravens spoke in their dumb black ways. They were clever ravens. They knew when the world was more dangerous than hunger. He rode back to Castle Black with Tormund when the nights seemed to have a new sharpness to them, like knives just whetted. He found Bowen Marsh in council with Yarwick and two stewards and Septon Celador, who had achieved the feat of being hungover and a little drunk at once. They spoke of grain and axe handles and men with the itch to go south and make a mistake their children would live to curse. John listened, his mouth hard, and gave answers that were not the answers he wanted to give, because the answers he wanted would have made them flare, and that would have made the room burn. He slept in a chair and dreamed of water being water. In the morning, Marsh came while John was buckling his cloak and stood just inside the door to the solar, as if the wood there might bite. "You will be killed," he said. "If I let a letter kill me, I wouldn't have lived anyway," John said. "What is it you want of me, Bowen?" "Don't force us to choose," Marsh said. "Don't set us to decide whether to strike you in the back to save the wall, or to let the wall be broken by the weight of your honor. Don't make men you know order a thing that will haunt them. We will do it if you push us. We are not the bold heroes of your stories. We are men with bad backs and wives who died somewhere we cannot remember, and toes that we thought were going to be with us longer than they were. We will do a mean thing to keep the world from being worse." "I'm not asking you to do anything," John said, and believed it for as long as it took him to look into Marsh's eyes and understand that a decision made with no one else in the room can still be a demand placed in 100 hands. He went to the yard with Ghost and lifted his leg over his horse and felt, for an instant, how simple it would be to ride and not look back. Instead, he turned to the men. "Keep to your work," he said. "No one leave their post. Tormund will be sending men with word. Make place for them. I will be." And then the shouting. It came like 3 shouts on top of each other, like a crowd of crows arguing with the same voice. He saw a flash of a knife. He saw a gloved hand. He saw Wick Whittlestick with his face flushed like the meat of a boiled shellfish and a blade in his shaking grip. He saw Marsh with his mouth and his eyes big and hurt. He saw Othel Yarwick trying to be 2 places at once. He saw Ed stepping between things with the unhurried sorrow of a man who had already done so in another life. He saw knives. He heard words that were meant to be a rallying cry or a comfort, and they sounded like something broken in a child's toy. He did not feel the first knife. He felt the second, shallow in the side, as if someone had thrown a ball of snow and then shoved their hand in to fetch it again. He was too surprised to be angry. Ghost's howl pulled something from the bones of Castle Black. Tormund's hand, huge and hot, closed on John's shoulder and then shoved him backwards, hard, off the horse he had just mounted. John went down, The world was the underside of men and the nearer part of the sky and the shape of ghost like a river of white anger. One moved in the corner of his sight, a great boulder suddenly acting like a living thing. "Stop," Jon said, and his voice did not go where it needed to go. The ice under him was not the wall's ice. It was the ice of a morning when men had decided to be salt. He smelled the iron of his own blood in a way that made him remember Winterfell, and the smell of hot iron in a forge, and the way he had loved a place with a love that hadn't anywhere else to sit. "Enough!" Tormund thundered, somewhere above. The word had force. It shoved. He swung a stick, the same stick perhaps that had beaten sense into an assassin, and cracked it against Wick Whittlestick's wrist. Wick's knife flew and spun and glittered with light that was not sunlight. Ed had a man's sleeve in his hand and the look on his face that he wore when he had to carry a latrine bucket. Othell was shouting, and Marsh was breathing like a man who had carried a sack of grain too heavy for too long, and realized now that he could put it down whenever he wanted and hadn't done so and didn't know what to do with his arms. Ghost's body hit Wick and knocked him into the slat of a cart. Wick made a pained sound and then another because Ghost's teeth had found what they were looking for and made a claim. Jon tried to stand. Tormund's arm caught him around the chest and held him up and also would not let him try again. A paradox made flesh. "Sit down," Tormund growled, very near. "Sit down, or I will sit you down." "I will not be sat," Jon said through his teeth. "I will sit you," Tormund said in a voice that could have shifted the courses of small rivers. "You are now my ward as much as your little scrawny boy is mine. You cannot die unless I tell you to." Jon closed his mouth because his control of his legs was not present and his control of his mouth felt like a joke, and because Tormund's hand was steady where the rest of the world was not. The yard whirled in a slower way. Men breathed. A knife scraped stone. There was a running noise of someone's feet. Bowen Marsh looked at Jon and something went out of him like smoke leaving a room that had been thick with it. He put his hands flat on his thighs. "You made us choose," he whispered. So soft Jon could barely hear it. "You made me this way." "I did not put a knife in your hand," Jon said. Came out calm. He was too tired for anger. "But even so, put it down. Not at me. Put it down. And if you have anger to spare, for someone who deserves it, turn toward the dead when they come and give it to them." Marsh's eyes filled in a way that made him look like no man Jon had known. It made him look like a boy whose balloon had burst and who was being told that there were no more. He turned and fled or walked or moved. Jon lost track of him. Ghost's head was at Jon's shoulder, licking blood as if he could lick it back in. They got Jon inside with minimal dignity. He did not bleed to death. This was accomplished by a woman from Molestown with hands like the root end of carrots, who had stitched many things that were not men and some that were. She told him to shut up twice, and since he had not spoken at either telling, he developed respect for her efficiency. Melisandre came once and stood where the light on the wall made a shadow behind her that was not her shape and said nothing and went away with a face like a closed book. Ed stationed himself at the door and invented a dozen reasons to keep men out. Satin sat at the foot of the bed and wrote nonsense numerals on a slate that were tally marks of every breath Jon took that did not hurt too much. When he was strong enough to walk without needing to be picked up by a giant, Jon went to the hall again and sat at the head of the short table that was too small for his enemies and too big for his friends. Tormund was there in a fur that looked as if it had been a bear who had died of regret. Val sat on the right, cheek hollow, eyes like winter-scoured glass. Ed on the left, his mouth its usual polite downturn. Othell with his beard like an accusation. The air smelled of ash and onion and sweat. "We will not draw knives in this hall again," Jon said. "Not for anything south of the wall. If a man has anger in him like a caged thing, he will take a walk where the wind can eat it out of him. If he cannot do that, he will take himself to the kitchens. The small keeps the large from breaking. As for Ramsay's letter," Ed intoned, "I have an idea. Let's burn it and the hands that wrote it in that order." "We watch," Jon said. "We put eyes on the King's Road. We put ears at the last river. We put men at Queen's Crown who can count higher than they can drink. We make sure that if a man with flayed men on his banners thinks he can come north and dance in our yard, He will dance on a causeway above black water with arrows in holes under his feet. That is my sort of dance, Tormund said, pleased. And we look north, Jon said, and his voice went quieter, because there was weight in it. We do not forget the thing that is not a man and not hunger and not pride. If I hear that anyone has let a corpse lie where it fell without fire and without a blade fit for it, I will make that man stand in the snow up to his waist until he remembers how to light a flame with his hands shaking. Melisandre came then and did not ask permission to speak. The cold comes, she said. It comes like a man who has had his rest and wakes with new hunger. There will be a night at Queen's Crown when you will hear singing at the water level. It will not be men. It will not be birds. Do not go to it. Whoever you send to go will belong to the singing by dawn. I've heard enough songs, Tormund said, but his jest had a hinge in it and it turned oddly. It came in late winter, when the sun fell alongside the afternoon and made the snow pretend it had ever been warm. A blue-white mist rose off the lake at Queen's Crown like something exhaling. The first man who heard the singing went to the window to spit, and his spit hung in the air like a thread of crystal before falling and breaking. The second man went to fetch Tormund and found him already pulling on a heavy cloak with a horn in one hand and the dragonglass spear in the other. The singing was not a sound. It was a thought that made your jaw soften and your feet think about not being yours. Men went to the causeway. Ghost went with them with his fur up and his teeth bared at nothing visible. Jon went too because if he asked someone else to he would have made his mouth. A liar. At the edge of the causeway, the mist thickened into shape. Shapes moved under the ice. You could see the distortion of them. They were small. That was the worst part. Hands pawed at the ice from below with the gentle patience of creatures who are not in a hurry because they do not need to breathe and do not need your permission. A child's face pressed against the ice and the blue of its eyes was wrong. That wrongness perhaps is what kept men from breaking. Hake made a sound that was all the sounds of fear and then put the horn to his lips and blew and blew and blew as if the blowing of that horn was the only thing keeping him alive and he would blow himself into a hole to keep from falling into one. The sound of it was brave and ignorant and full of the world's spite. Back, Jon said. His breath was a blade. He took his sword out and the firelight from the torches ran along it like someone trying to run away on foot from the winter. Tormund's spear had its black point on the end of the world. A hand broke through the ice suddenly, blue and wrong and terrible. It reached at the air as if to pull the cold up over its head like a blanket. Ghost lunged and bit, and the hand came off at the wrist and crawled on its own like a spider until Tormund stamped it and then made a choked laugh at himself for stamping a hand. Shapes rose out of the water. They were in the mist, and the mist was in them, and the torches dimmed as if torches could be frightened. Tormund drove the spear into the first thing that made its chest known. It hissed like steam, came apart. The man who had the net had the sense of mind to drop it on the second and hold it down until Jon could get the edge of his sword where it needed to be, and then he cut and the cut became the world. They did not run. They did not get to run. That was not the nature of this fight. It was a series of small hells, each one resolved or paid for, and when the mist finally retreated, resentful as a cat dragged from a warm patch, there were wounds and there were no dead among the living and there were two less of the wrong things. No one spoke for a long time. Men breathed. The lake lay as if thinking of nothing at all. Ghost licked a wound in his own leg without complaint. When they could speak, Tormund laughed like a man listening to a story that had happened far away to someone he might like to believe was himself. I told you, he said to Jon, breathing steam. A lord is a man who gets to say, I told you so when the world goes the way he said. I'm a lord now. Jon looked at him. This great flawed soul who had put a ring on his arm and thought he could hold another man's life in it when it mattered. It was absurd and it was splendid and it was, for the first time since he had been old enough to know better, fun in a way that did not apologize for itself. You are, he said. Now help me make more like you who like to say it. After that, Ramsay's men did come. They came in winter cruelty, in small groups, with knives and with insults, with banners that made snow look worse by comparison. They came to steal a girl, and discovered a causeway full of spearwives with quiet eyes. They came to cut a boy's throat, and found a boy with a horn who would not stop blowing until the man's teeth hurt. They came to set fire to a barn and learned that wet hides smell terrible when burned, but that the smell will make even a brave man reconsider standing near it. They learned the gift could speak in a new language, one made of the free folk and the black brothers and the odd stubborn mole who had put a lock on his door and come out to ask what in the seven it was he heard. They learned they could not count on snow to do their work or the dark to do their thinking. John wrote none of that in his letters to anyone. If a man is lucky, he has a place where his victories do not need to be told because they are obvious to everyone living them. The wall did not know victory. It knew survival. It knew the way men's humor hardened into a shell you could drink from, and the way a stew could go from thin to tolerable with the addition of a rabbit or a lie. He kept all his words for the men at the end of his table, for the boy with the horn, for Tormund when he needed words least and therefore could be trusted to hear them. There were nights when he lay in his chamber with the wind saying what it always said, and he thought of Winterfell, that other wall. He did not let himself go there long. Memory is a country with traps in it. He had enough traps visible under the ice. Spring came because it had to, not because anyone wanted it for itself. It was a mean spring, the sort that moved like an old man through a doorway and asked what was the point of the room it had entered. The lake cracked along its edges with sounds like bones snapping. Tormund oversaw the making of 2 boats that were not much to look at but sat on the water, as if they understood that sitting was not obvious. He paced the causeway like a cat, sniffed the air, and declared that the fish were returning like men who had remembered something they'd left behind. The first net full drew a cheer from watching men that sounded like a rockfall. John stood on the tower and thought how there had been a winter where he would have been glad of fish and no blood. A raven arrived with a letter that was not pink. It was a neat white paper with a neat bold hand. It bore the seal of a wolf, not of Winterfell but of something that had borrowed the wolf's shape. The letter said the king in the south had burned and burned again, and a comet had burst over the river at night as if to laugh. It said the dragons were not content to be bone anymore. It used names John was not certain he believed in. It made the world beyond the wall's shadow huge in a new way, and for a dizzying instant John wanted to crawl under a bench in the kitchens like a boy and sleep among sacks of flour again. He folded it and put it with the others he had not sent. He went to Queen's Crown with Yarwick and Ed and 3 brothers who had never left the yard for more than a mile. He stood at the causeway with Tormund in the damp cool air and watched the boats bob and listened to men tell small lies about the size of fish. Tormund nudged him with a big elbow. "I've done it," he said. "I'm a lord. The kneelers know my name. They spit it and they wipe their chins after, and I like that too. My women laugh a little less when I speak. My enemies hate the sound of my boots when I walk in the hall because it means I'm not dead. I've done it." "You have," John said, and would not permit his mouth to twist with the knowledge that men still died and the dead still sang, and there were kings who wrote letters with knives in them. He let this be a victory because sometimes it was necessary to take the small ones and not refuse them for their size. "We'll make better boats," Tormund said. "We'll build on that shore too. We'll set a lamp on a tall pole at night so men can feel there's a sky for them and not just a roof. We'll put a dog at the door who knows the difference between a neighbor and a ghost. We'll drink something that tastes like it wanted to be stew but lost its way." "We will," John said. "Tell your red woman to stop coming here to look at the water like it owes her something," Tormund added. "It makes my beard itch." "I'll tell her," John said, and did not add anything about the way Melisandre's eyes had softened over Shireen's lessons, or the way Queen Celis' letters had started to include only polite threats instead of vulgar ones. He had learned which words to share and which to put in a pocket. The wind shifted. The smell of thawed earth came, a promise and a warning. Ghost stood and shivered his coat into new arrangement. Across the causeway, a boy ran with his horn banging against his back and the happiness of running clearly the only object he had in mind. The water lapped. The tower threw a shadow on it that moved like a living thing. "I thought I would die younger," Tormund said unexpectedly. "When I was your age, I thought there would be a great fight and a woman and then nothing. Now I think maybe there will be 50 small fights and then a walk and then eggs. Maybe I have become a kneeler in my heart." He laughed so loud the birds rose. "You've become a man," John said. "A lord. What's the difference?" "Ask the dead," John said softly. He put his hand on the stone and felt its roughness and thought of the way stone endures and of water and of rivers and of edges and knew, as he had always known, that there would be no easy clarity. Only this, to make of his promise a shield for those who could not speak, and to force the South to learn that the North was one thing when it had to be and another when it chose. A horn blew. It was Hakes. Jon turned. The sound was not the tone he used for raiders or for the thick wrongness that sometimes came in the morning as if it were a fog. It was the sound he used when there was something to fetch men to see. Tormund put his feet on the causeway with a sudden lightness that looked wrong on a man his size, and any man alive would have envied it if they saw him do it in a hall with a woman watching. They ran to the boy. He pointed. South, from the King's Road way, a small group of riders came into sight. They bore no banners high. The lead rider held something low, wrapped in cloth. They rode careful, as if the horses were remembering where their legs were put. Tormund bared his teeth. "This is either trouble or trouble with a nicer face," he said. Ghost growled. Jon put his hand on Ghost's head and felt the hair rise under his palm like wheat. He squinted into the light and thought he knew the shape of the man at the front by the way he sat his horse. Too proud for his height, as if he had made his hour of the day early and wanted the sun to catch up. It was not Ramsay. It was a man in a gray cloak with fur at the collar and eyes like ale left on a windowsill too long, and with him a woman with hair the exact shade of wood ash and a boy with a face like a place you used to go sledding. They were Karstarks, though Jon did not say the name aloud. The wrapped thing the man carried he lifted at the causeway's edge and unwrapped and showed Tormund without moving a hand toward Jon. It was a head. It was Arnulf Karstark's, if the scar and the nose like a thought and the lack of scorn now told true. There were letters with it and a purse and the smell of a long journey. "Stannis," the man said, and his mouth moved on the name like a piece of grit. "He is not dead." He wanted this scent where it would do him good. He looked at Jon with a quiet that was new. "He says he goes to break a Bolton army they say is broken and not broken, and that if the Lord of the Gift can make the gift hold, he will have done a king's work, whether or not there are men in the South who would like to call themselves that." Tormund looked at the head as if it were a fish that had swum ashore to ask a question. "I can hold anything I can bite," he said. "I am a lord now, didn't you hear? I have a plan for stew and law and for men who forget that their fingers do not belong to them if they touch what is not theirs." He took the head with no show and no pretended delicacy and handed it to one of his men as if handing a kettledrum. "Put it where the rats can find it. If the rats don't want it, we'll have a talk with them about manners." The Karstark laughed then, a short dry laugh that made Jon think there might be a place left in the world where laughter wasn't a defense. He dismounted and knelt, and the motion twisted Jon's gut because men kneeling made him remember small things like the weight of his father's hand. "My lady wife," the man said, and the woman pulled back her hood and Jon remembered her name now, and it was Alice as it should be, and her eyes were clear as a piece of ice with a leaf under it. "She is mistress of Carhold. The Magnar of then stands for her there. We heard whispers that the gift was a place where standing did not need a southern word. We came to see if standing here counted as standing at all." "It does," Jon said, as if he could grant anything with breath. "If you will stand when the cold asks you, and if you will stand when the South lies to you, then yes, we have a causeway you can stand on all day and never get bored." Tormund clapped Karstark on the shoulder. "We'll get bored. We'll make it a rule. Every man who wishes to stand will take turns for being bored, and the others will bring him something to bite." The laugh made the air warmer. The riders crossed the causeway with their hands open, and the wrapped head went where Tormund had said. The free folk brought out bread and the Karstarks brought out salt, and men did what men have always done when not being fools. They made it so that the world looked for a moment like a house you might want to live in. That night, with fish on their faces and grease on their fingers and no music except Hake's horn when he forgot his place and blew it and made everyone swear with fondness, Jon felt something like pride that was not a sin. He went out alone onto the wall of the tower and looked down at the causeway, a ribbon laid over certain drowning, and up at the smear of stars. He put a hand on Ghost's head and another on the stone and tried to feel where one began and the other ended. He felt eyes. He turned. Melisandre was there, her hands tucked into her sleeves against the damp. Her hair was a wound in the night. "You live," she said, and it was neither a blessing nor a question. "For now," Jon said. "It is enough," she said. "I saw him dying here. I saw him dying with knives for ribs and arrows for hair. I saw him dying with water for lungs and men for teeth. He has vexed me by not doing any of that. It is good to be vexed. It means the fire is not bored." "You speak of me as if I were something other than a man," Jon said, and he was not sure anymore whether it annoyed him or comforted him. "You have always wanted to be something other than yourself," she said gently. "This is merely a better version. Tell me one true thing," he said suddenly, and the words surprised him, as if he had flung them at her to see if they would break. "The dead are coming," she said. "They would be coming even if you were a farmer. They would be coming even if queens never existing. They would be coming if the South had never learned to lay stone upon stone. The only thing that changes is whether we make a place for the living to stand when they come." "Here," Jon said, and it was not a question. "Here," she agreed, and looked at the dark line of the causeway as if it were a story she did not need to read to the end to know what happened. "Here." For a time, days became weeks with their busy whetstone sound. Tormund held the gift by being loud and being kind. He took the gifts that came and turned them into chores that felt like victories. He learned which men could count and which could not, and gave the ones who could not jobs that made use of their other truths. He called his council by beating a pan when the hall was built big enough to make banging a joy, and when men came to him with slick words, he told them to go back and bring him a woman with hands rougher than theirs to speak instead, and then he listened to her. He went to Mole's Town when it would have been easier to send a boy and sat on the ground because the bench there was too small. He judged a case about a stolen axe by making both men chop wood until their arms sang and then giving the axe to the man who had better kept the rhythm. He honored guest right with a ferocity that made men understand that it was law and also a piece of his soul he would not allow to be dented. Jon watched, met, decided. He sent men to Eastwatch with cod and brought them back with children whose parents had not. He sent Ed to the Shadow Tower twice to carry orders and to see whether they were being obeyed without insult. He answered letters from the South with fewer words than the South had sent him. He sat with the boy with the horn sometimes and listened to Hake tell him small stories about his mother's hair or how snow tastes different when you catch it on your tongue at the beginning of a fall and the end. He went to the wall and let the wind bite him until he felt his face carve itself. He thought of a girl with hair like a fire that had been set by accident and how she had taught him a kind of love that had nothing to do with vows and everything to do with being stupid in the right direction. He did not say her name. Ghost ranged, sometimes vanishing into a white nothing and then returning like an idea remembered. He brought back scents on his fur that made Jon's head lift. Wolf and cold and a sweetness like some sap that was not from any tree men knew. Once he came with black on his teeth, and it looked like he had been eating night. Jon washed him with his hands and a rag and let the black bleed down his wrists and looked at his own fingers afterward and saw that his skin had kept it. The next letter from the South that truly mattered came with a seal Jon did not recognize. It was not the flayed man. It was not a wolf. It was a tower with a crown on it. A silly thing if you stored it alone in your mind, a dangerous thing if you attached it to a man. It demanded grain for men in Winterfell with words like cold ethics. Jon sent a cart and then another and a third that turned over in slush and was righted by a giant who grumbled entire sentences with one syllable. He felt like he was feeding a fire that he hated. He did it anyway because you do not let a house burn when you can put water on it because the men inside are fools. You do not let children freeze because their fathers are bastards. You do not forget who you are because someone else forgot and made a let. To justify it. Tormund caught him in the yard then, when their breath made patterns that looked like language. "You know this can't last," he said kind. "You know that one day the dead will come in a way that will not let us tell stories about how we stood. It will be like waking to a hand on your mouth. It will be like the moment when you fall and the ground says, 'Here I am,' and you do not have time to put your hands out." "I know," Jon said. He closed his eyes briefly and saw a corridor of blue and a sword of light he had never held. He opened his eyes. "But we made a place where there will be a floor. We built it with lies the South likes and truths the North understands. We filled our stew with bones and with humor. We put a big man with loud hands in the center and said he was a lord because sometimes names help men know where to stand. That matters. It does, Tormund agreed. And when the dead come, we'll give them a causeway and show them how narrow a world can be when men decide to hold it. Jon laughed, surprised, and it did not hurt. I thought you didn't like causeways. I hate them, Tormund said cheerfully. I love them. He clapped Jon on the shoulder. Come, man. Stew promised to be terrible, and it kept its word. You cannot ask for more from stew. They went in. The hall was warm enough to make their eyes water. Men sat on benches and leaned against one another and pretended to care about nothing. A woman from Molestown sang in a low voice about a man who became his own boot to keep his feet dry. It made bad sense, and that made it perfect. Ghost lay near the hearth with his eyes closed and his ears alert. Jon took a spoonful of stew that tasted like the world at its honest worst and best. He looked at Tormund, lord of a place that had needed a word for what he had been doing all along, and felt the shape of what they had done sit in him like a stone warmed by sun. When the dead came in the end, and they would find a house with knives above the doors and with songs under the floorboards and with a table that had been mended twice. They would find men and women who had decided not to let go of one another even when fear argued that it was honorable to do so. They would find a free folk lord with a ring of iron on his arm, laughing as if laughter were a weapon and using it as one. They would find a wolf on the threshold, and a boy with a horn bigger than his forearm, and a man who had sworn a vow and learned to keep it in ways the words had never imagined. The wind rattled the shutters. The world turned its face, not toward summer, never that, but toward the part of winter that knows it has an end. Jon put down his spoon and stretched his fingers out above the fire and let the heat go into his bones and his forgetful heart and his too-hearing mind. Tormund bumped his knee under the table like a big dog. Jon bumped back. Another bowl, Tormund called, for the Lord Commander, who is less dead than most and more alive than is comfortable. He winked. The hall laughed. Out on the lake, the ice cracked, soft as speech. Snow fell, and it felt not like a threat but like the world reminding itself what it is. Men slept with knives within reach and with their feet to the fire. Somewhere a raven spoke to itself in a dream, black wings moving. The gift held. For a while, that was enough. For a while, the work of being alive was its own title, and the Lord who had never wanted to be one wore it like a good cloak, patched and mended, warm where it needed to be. The boy with the horn slept with his head on the case of it, and it looked, for a moment, exactly like a world that could be kept.